George Knapp, an investigative reporter who works at a Las Vegas television station. George Knapp still works for the CBS affiliate in Las Vegas. He's still around. And you still see him on Joe Rogan podcast from time to time talking about Bob Lazar and things like that. So, in a nutshell, Lazar tells George that he was a government employee working at Area 51 in the S4 or Section 4 area. And in there they had 9 craft, presumably of extraterrestrial origin, and his job was to reverse engineer them. What made them work? How did they fly? What are the materials made of? What's the technology behind the controls? Various things like that. That was his mission. He talked about things like hand scanners and quite a few other things relative to what he was doing. He claimed that he went to school at Caltech, also MIT, or Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He told George that he was recruited by an employment agency to go to work there. He produced a W-2 form, which showed that he worked for the government. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, a W-2 form is a form that employees receive each year from their employer, which shows how much money they made and how much they paid in tax, or how much tax was withheld from their pay, and then that form is submitted with their federal tax return, so to make sure they pay the right amount of tax each year on their income. So George, being the good investigative reporter, starts to check out the story. Well, he can't find any records at Caltech or MIT, although Bob's name appeared in a student directory at one of the schools. He reached out to the employment agency that Bob quoted, and initially they said, yeah, he was a client. And George asked for information about it, which they claimed, yeah, we'll make it available to you in a couple of weeks. Well, as time goes by, George keeps getting the same story, and after the 2-year mark, Bob Lazar, who's that? They disavowed any knowledge of Bob Lazar. So we've already touched on this, and I think you're going to know where I'm going with this. If Bob Lazar worked at Area 51, he would have had to have had a top secret security clearance and more than likely signed a non-disclosure agreement, which makes him subject to criminal and civil penalties should he disclose information about what he's working on, or even the fact that he works there. So, if all of it's true, why then has the government not prosecuted Bob Lazar? Well, 2 reasons that I can think of. If you have a third or a fourth, I'm happy to hear it. 2 I can think of. Number 1, the government isn't going to bother with a guy who's telling a good story. Because if it's all it is a story, they're not going to waste their time, not going to expend the energy to come after a guy that is essentially a crackpot, a storyteller, a fiction writer. But on the other hand, if he is telling the truth, if they come after him, they've just verified his story. They've just validated the information. Because again, why would you go to the expense and the trouble of prosecuting somebody who's only a fiction writer? And so as long as there's nothing else to support his statements, then he can be classified as a nut job, exactly. Does everyone tend to agree with that theory?
Yeah.
Or those 2 possibilities? Anything else?
There's the possibility that...
Well, yeah, but even so, if he had an accidental death, let's say a brake failure on his car, okay, that's still going to, gonna seem a little too coincidental.
It's a possibility that also at some point back in Lazar's time, they recognized that there's an event coming, or the end of as Colonel Carl Nels suggested, that there's a non-public agreement is what was number 3 on his list, and he's speaking out now about it. He's another whistleblower. If that agreement was knowledgeable to the people within the Pentagon, they recognize that they need this information to come out, and they know by 2027, which is what former CIA John Ramirez is saying, there's an event coming in 2027, and that we need to have the people prepared or they're going to panic. So a bunch of doctors and scientists worked on a disclosure plan, which is actually underway right now. Dr. Gary Nolan and others have worked on how to get this information out to the public in a way that they want to avoid what they're calling catastrophic disclosure. And I think the hardest answers to what's coming will be talked about in the last year or two before 2027. But there is definitely a map to start telling the people, because something's supposed to happen in 2027, according to people in and around the CIA circles, that they know there's an event happening. And if you look up Dr. Gary Nolan, Colonel Carl Nell, you all know about Luisa Elizondo, and I'm names of my kryptonite, but I'm forgetting a lot of them right now. But
there's a lot of actors in that theater.
Yeah, well, there's David Grush, who's high rank. In fact, Congress had to apply. I was telling you earlier, had to apply for clearances to get access to the information he was trying to give them, and they did get it. And they ended up going out to one of the bases to speak to people at the base about it, and the base commander left, apparently, according to Anna Luna, Representative Anna Luna. And they said, we're not going to talk to you about, the UAP issue. And the Congress members had to remind them that we're congressional oversight, you answer to us. And there's a big battle going on right now with Congress and these people in places of, secret knowledge.
Been going on for a long time, and I think, what you're talking about, last summer, when the Congressional Committee on that topic was interviewing a number of people about the UAP phenomena and all of the evidence that is currently available, the video, the radar images, the infrared, the photographs, everything that everyone has, the story of the Tic Tac incident, Commander Fravor and the others who came forward offering their testimony upon request of Congress. And at the end of the day, we still don't necessarily know any more than we did before that whole thing started. So yes, Congress, in the U.S., the civilians control the military. Okay, the President of the United States is the Commander-in-Chief. Okay, he's a civilian, but the Commander-in-Chief is who the military answers to. So the civilians control the military, but in this case, the tail's wagging the dog. The military is still gatekeeping that information quite tightly. You remember back between 1952 and 1969, you had Project Blue Book. And in Blue Book, there were thousands of reports of UAPs. And the purpose of Blue Book was to research those and identify what they were. Well, at the end of the day, about 96% of what was found or reported were known phenomena. Aircraft, birds, and weather anomalies, whatever. But there's still over 700 incidents that are still classified as unknown. Now, to me, unknown can mean they don't have enough information to make a decision on what it was, or they don't want to talk about it. Okay. Talking about panic, okay, or about, you mentioned controlled disclosure. I like that term, controlled disclosure. Now, you remember hearing about back in the 1930s, Orson Welles reading War of the Worlds on the radio in New York City and over the tri-state area, and what happened?
People killed themselves.
Huge panic. People jumping out of windows. I mean, the Martians were invading. It was a bad deal. All Orson Welles was doing was reading a book that was published back in the 1880s by H.G. Wells. But people hearing this information were freaking out. Someone even suggested to me that was actually, the government did that on purpose to gauge what people's reactions would be to news about extraterrestrials. Okay. An interesting thought. Now, to me at least, it seems a little out there, but I'm not going to discount it. But the point being is that people Now remember, also back in the 30s, that's how people got their information, was either on the news, through newspaper or on radio. Their news, sports, and entertainment all came through the radio, right? That was their real-time source of information and entertainment. So now Orson Welles, who most people knew, great voice, is reading a story that a lot of people probably had never heard of, and they were going nuts. So fast forward to today. If the United States government, or any other government for that matter, were to reveal that they were in the presence of other earthly, non-Earth intelligence, non-Earth materials, don't you think that a certain segment of the population of the 8 billion people on our planet would freak out?
I think there will be a section,
Probably so, right?
a few sections,
Yeah.
which is why I think NASA had 12 religious theologians go out to visit them, and I suppose they had told them about the reality of the situation, because the question posed to them was, how will your followings react to an announcement of non-human intelligence on Earth? And now you just seen recently in the last few weeks the Vatican do a live stream on new guidelines for supernatural apparitions that include Jesus, angels, or God himself, or something like that. So I expect that may align with the 2027 event, and they know that people are going to start seeing more of this, and they're preparing their people.
Well, we also have to be open to the possibility that non-human life can also take the form of just a biological organism. For example, in the 1969 movie, the story written by Michael Crichton, The Andromeda Strain, we were dealing with a virus, another world virus. That's a landfill on the left, called Western Elite. So you had a virus, right? You guys remember seeing the movie or hearing the story or about it, the Andromeda Strain?
I heard of it.
All right, so here you have an alien organism that's incompatible with humans and wipes out a whole town in Arizona, or a small town in Arizona. And so they have a group of scientists racing against time to figure out what it is, what kind of a threat it poses, and toward the end of the movie, whether or not they're going to have to nuke the whole facility to sterilize it. All right, so extraterrestrial life or other non-human life doesn't necessarily have to be something that looks similar to us, be bipedal or something else. It can be a lot of different things. So,
well, the suggestion.
You remember the lunar astronauts, Apollo 11 astronauts, when they came back and they went on the carrier. What's one of the first things that happened? They were quarantined. They were put in a box and quarantined for a period of time, on the chance they might have picked up some organism that's not on our planet. All right, and another example of that. Think about earlier explorers from Europe to the North American continent. What did they bring with them? Disease. So the native peoples that were here had never been exposed to smallpox and other things. So disease brought to them by the Europeans decimated those populations. So lesson learned there, astronauts come back to the moon, they put them in quarantine to see if they're carrying any bugs.
It's the
Science fiction, TV's a movie. Star Trek Enterprise, that TV series, when they came back on ship, what did they have to do? They went into a chamber, rubbed themselves down with a disinfectant gel, sat underneath a light, and to kill any organisms. Later on, the transporters, used in Star Trek, would purge the people returning back to the transporter with any foreign mechanism or organisms, right? So yes, it's a real thing, something we need to be aware of. And could extraterrestrial life take that form? Absolutely. Whether it has any intelligence or malevolence remains to be seen.
Well, the Virginia, Brazil incident where the military officer attempted to grab the being has reportedly died of an unknown cause, and they won't allow the extraction of his body from the ground now. But what they are saying now, and this is coming from high-ranking people, is that and even Anna Luna pointed it out, that David Rush no longer says extraterrestrial, he says non-human intelligence, and that they are interdimensional. That she kept emphasizing that point, that he says interdimensional. So we're talking not something from somewhere out in space around us, but something possibly overlapping us and actually moving among us, as you've seen the jellyfish UFO, or what's that called? The Pentagon's declassified video of the jellyfish UFO over Iraq, I believe it was. It went out into the ocean, and you can see that the object was changing its heat from dark to cold.
I remember seeing that video just the other day of the jellyfish UFO.
Invisible to the eye in our light spectrum, invisible light spectrum, but it was absolutely there. So they could see it on the radar system, but they couldn't see it to the eye, which leads them to think that these things could be in many places without our knowledge, walking among us. Actually, they're actually talking about non-human. Who is it? They just released. Harvard just released a study saying that they suspect that aliens are walking among us, and that was on the news.
Well, again, going back to the analogy of, and again, and I don't mean to beat a dead horse by saying this, but I bring it up because so many things are relevant to what's going on in today's world. So again, we're talking about non-human intelligence walking among us. All right. What did we see in all iterations of many science fiction TVs and movies, including Star Trek? Human explorers, and in some cases they would go down to a planet disguised as the local inhabitants to learn more about their cultures and technology.
And Elizondo equates that to the panda zookeepers. They go into the zoo environment for the pandas, dressed as pandas, so that the pandas don't get excited when they see the people in their environment.
Mm-hmm.
So I think when you add that to the mixture of the conversations going around with other people, the suggestion here is, or the inference is that they are walking among us.
Well, they very well could be. They very well could be. And I'm open to the possibility. Honestly, a lot of people would panic at the idea. I would love to see or hear about it, or see some confirmation. We remember in the 1996 movie Independence Day, where you have these 15-mile diameter ships all set up here over major cities around the world. Well, unless something like what you're suggesting is going to happen in 3 years, or something like that happens to where all of a sudden there's something appears in the sky over Los Angeles, then it's the governments can keep it a secret and keep it from us. But something like that, you can't hide. So hopefully within my lifetime, something like that will happen. Not necessarily in a bad way, but to answer the question. Are we alone?
If you look at how the Congress people coming out of the classified meetings are reacting in the media questions them. Mark Laszlo's another from Politico, I think the name of his company is. They're saying things like, what's the gist? We know you can't speak about what was said in there, but what's the gist of the meeting? And one response was, lock your doors. Another one was, I didn't want this to be the future for my daughter. Senator Richard Blumenthal spoke to the military about the threats in space, how they're growing, and how the American populace has no idea about the threats that are there. And that was, you can find that video online of his meeting with the military.
Well, even Harry Reid, the senator from Nevada, was a big believer in UAPs and extraterrestrial intelligence. He had a lot to say on the subject. And Reid was, he wasn't a wacko. He was a pretty well-respected guy. Was around for quite a long time.
No, he was the one that started ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program.
You're correct. He diverted money, or
$23 million
appropriation for those types of programs.
Yeah, I think it was 22 million.
By the way, for those of you who don't know, AATIP, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. So,
Which was
why does the U.S. government then, are they spending money to have this alphabet soup of agencies investigating something that doesn't exist?
exactly.
Okay, and I say doesn't exist because they would like you to believe that there's no such thing as extraterrestrials or spaceships or ETs or whatever, okay? But yet they're spending a lot of money on it.
Well, you can see some of the actual, it's presumed UFO crash materials. Dr. Gary Nolan provides those to Jesse Michaels on Jesse Michaels' YouTube channel in small pieces. His larger pieces, he says, are in a vault, and he's not allowed to show those.
So, we're talking about pieces, we go back to, a story that most of us have heard about, Roswell in 1947. So, Mac Brazel, a rancher in New Mexico, sees something crash on his ranch land. He goes out to investigate, finds a debris field with lots of broken metal pieces all over the place, including a disc-shaped object. So he contacts the local sheriff, who tells him to contact the Army. So he reaches out to the Army Air Corps base near Roswell, and the commander of the base is Colonel William Blanchard. Blanchard dispatches a couple of officers to investigate. They find the debris field. They send out a team of soldiers that collect all the pieces. And you have a very lightweight, nearly indestructible material, as was reported. So it wasn't long after that the Colonel Blanchard issues a press release. Yeah, my soldiers have recovered the remains of a flying disc. Flying disc? Well, flying disc back in 1947 was the same thing as saying a flying saucer. Well, it wasn't long after that that Colonel Blanchard's command in Fort Worth, Texas, says, no. Colonel Blanchard's guys misidentified what they found. It was actually a weather balloon outfitted with a radar disc. All right, well, what are we left to believe? Well, typically when you hear one story and another story that conflicts with it, one's the truth and one's a cover-up, is a conclusion we can come to.
Well,
so here's one thing about Colonel Blanchard that you may know. Colonel Blanchard retired from the Air Force as a 4-star general. So if you know anything about the military and you're a colonel, most colonels want to be generals. You don't get your 1st star if you're considered a wacko or a storyteller, or you're not one of the guys, so to speak. So Colonel Blanchard was probably considered a pretty straightforward, reliable guy, not prone to flights of fancy. Now, did someone go to Colonel Blanchard off to the side, pull him aside and say, hey Bill, if you want that star, you better knock off this flying disc stuff? That probably happened. But you were ready to say something, Terrence?
I was going to suggest that, if it was a weather balloon, first of all, if military showed up, how could they not identify it as a weather balloon? And then, if it was a weather balloon, why the grid search of the desert for something that's so benign? So that kind of points out that, this wasn't a weather balloon.
Yeah, a lot of inconsistencies in that story.
You wouldn't grid search.
If you go, there's another website called Center for UFO Studies, or CUFOS.org, and there's a lot of other material available there on the Roswell incident. I'm going to change gears on us just a little bit.
Can I just say one thing about the material? The crash materials, Dr. Nolan, the CIA was sent to Dr. Nolan to look at brain scans of service people in close proximity to UAP, and they found that, I might be saying it wrong, but the basal ganglia and the caudate putamen in the brain, they found commonalities between the service people. The CIA wanted to know whether that was a result of being in proximity to the craft, or these people were born with this in their brain, but it is not a normal finding in the brain. But they also discovered, because the CIA was sent to Nolan because he was developing the most advanced equipment on the planet that's used in the medical industry, they wanted him to look at the metals, which he did show some of the metals, and in those metals there was atomic manipulation of the metals itself, which contained bismuth and aluminum, and there was a clear divide between the particles that we're connecting the two metals, and we don't have that manufacturing process available, or it's unknown. Okay, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
No, that's all right.
I'm just doing it for the video.
Got it. All right, so we've entered an area of southern Nevada called the Pahranagat Valley. Pahranagat is an Indian word, and it means a couple different things. Valley of shining waters, place where you get your feet wet, things like that. But it basically has to do with water. All right, if you look off to the left, okay, we were talking about meadows earlier. Does that look like it could be a meadow? Yeah, got,
Sure.
I see green grass out there. I see some trees in the distance. And over on left shoulder is actually standing water out there. Here in the next, probably about a mile, if you look on the left-hand side of the road, you're going to see a lake. Lower Pahranagat Lake. So this entire valley was part of an ancient water system called the White River. Today it's a riparian environment. Quite a few different bird species come through here in what's an area called the Pacific Flyway. So if you look to the left and you see the grass and everything else, the water that's out there, it stays like this year round. It doesn't dry up in the summertime. It's like this all the time. So to me, this is what Las Vegas looked like 200 years ago. Kind of more desert on the right, but more lush on the left. Later on, you're going to see some big trees, cottonwood trees. Again, you can't have cottonwood trees without a good source of water. And there it is. That's the lower Pahranagat Lake.
So
But-
is that water from the basin from naturally flowing?
That's groundwater.
Groundwater coming
the
up.
water table here is very, very high. So that's just water that's seeped up out of the ground.
Yes.
That's just groundwater. Now, in the wintertime, it does snow here.